My father ripped my Army enlistment papers in half, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're no daughter of mine." 15 years later, he couldn't meet my eyes when a 4-star general saluted me in front of hundreds of people. I never imagined those two moments would belong to the same life. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 33 years old, and as I tell you this story, I'm sitting alone in a quiet room at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, waiting to pin on the silver eagle of a full colonel. Outside the window, soldiers in dress uniforms cross the parade field with the kind of purpose you only notice after you've spent half your life wearing the same boots. Someone knocked gently on the door. "Colonel Select Mitchell." I smiled. "Almost." The young captain laughed. "They're about ready for you, ma'am." "Give me 5 minutes." He nodded and closed the door. I reached for the paper cup of coffee on the table, but before I could take a sip, the television mounted on the wall caught my attention. The local station from Columbus was running a feature about today's ceremony. The reporter stood outside the auditorium interviewing guests. Then I froze. There he was, Frank Mitchell, my father. His hair had turned mostly gray since the last time I'd seen him. He wore a navy suit, a small American flag pin on his lapel, and the confident smile I remembered from childhood whenever he wanted people to believe he was the smartest man in the room. The reporter asked, "Mr. Mitchell, how does it feel knowing your daughter is being promoted to colonel today?" He chuckled. "I've been proud of her ever since she decided to join the Army." I nearly dropped the coffee. For a second, I wondered if I'd somehow stepped into someone else's life. Proud. That wasn't the word I remembered. Not even close. The memory came back so clearly that I could still smell my mother's pot roast. It was June 2010. Lancaster, Ohio. Sunday dinner had always been sacred in our house. Dad sat at the head of the table. Mom brought biscuits from the oven. My older brother Kevin complained about the Cleveland Browns before the season had even started. Everything felt ordinary, until I cleared my throat. "I've got something to tell everyone." Dad looked up from his mashed potatoes. "What is it?" I slid an envelope across the table. He frowned. "What's this?" "My enlistment papers." Silence. He opened the folder. His eyes moved across the page. Then his jaw tightened. "You enlisted?" "Yes." "You mean you're actually leaving?" I nodded. "I leave in August." He leaned back in his chair. "No." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean absolutely not." "Dad!" "I already paid your tuition at Ohio State." "I know." "You'll be studying business." "I don't want to study business." His voice grew louder. "So what you think you know better than your parents?" "I've wanted this since high school." "You've wanted a lot of stupid things." Mom quietly reached for his arm. "Frank." He pulled away. "No." He looked directly at me. "The Army isn't for young women." I took a slow breath. "There are thousands of women serving. They're making a mistake too." Kevin stared at his plate. "Mom wouldn't look at either of us." I tried again. "I've thought about this for years." Dad stood so suddenly his chair tipped backward. "You think wearing a uniform is going to make you somebody?" "No. I'll tell you exactly what it'll make you." He grabbed the enlistment packet, ripped it straight down the middle. Then again. Paper floated onto the dining room floor like snow. "You'll be a disgrace to this family." Nobody spoke. The kitchen clock kept ticking. I remember hearing a dog bark somewhere down the street. Funny what your brain notices when your heart is breaking. I bent down and picked up the torn pages. "Dad," he pointed toward the front door. "If you leave this house to join the Army..." His voice became strangely calm. "Don't ever come back." Mom finally cried. "Frank, please." He ignored her. "As far as I'm concerned." He looked right at me. "I don't have a daughter anymore." Those words hurt more than anything that happened during the next 15 years. That night I packed everything I owned into 2 duffel bags, a few pairs of jeans, running shoes, family photos, except there weren't many with me in them. Around midnight someone knocked softly on my bedroom door. Grandpa William stepped inside. He'd served in Korea decades earlier. He didn't say much. He simply handed me an old Army Challenge coin worn smooth around the edges. "I carried this overseas." I turned it over in my hand. "I can't take this." "You can." He smiled. "Honor usually costs something." He reached into his pocket again and handed me $50. "Your grandmother would have insisted." I hugged him. He whispered into my ear. "Your father is letting pride do his thinking." The next morning I loaded my bags into the trunk of an old taxi that took me to the Greyhound station in Columbus. Mom stood on the porch. She never came down the steps. Dad didn't come outside at all. Grandpa saluted me from the driveway. I returned the salute even though I hadn't earned one yet. The bus ride to Fort Jackson felt longer than any trip I'd ever taken. Some passengers slept. Others watched movies on their phones. I stared out the window as Ohio slowly disappeared behind me. Cornfields gave way to highways. Then mountains. Then places I'd never seen before. I kept reaching into my pocket, feeling Grandpa's challenge coin. Whenever I touched it, I reminded myself why I was leaving. Not because I hated home. Because I wanted to become someone I could respect. Still, as the bus rolled through the darkness, one question wouldn't leave me alone. Had I just traded my family for a dream? Or had my father made that choice for both of us? The first thing the Army taught me was that nobody cared where I came from. Not my last name. Not my hometown. Not the fact that I'd cried myself to sleep on a Greyhound bus only 3 nights earlier. At Fort Jackson, South Carolina, everyone started at exactly the same place. Scared, confused, and wondering if we'd made the biggest mistake of our lives. The drill sergeant answered that question before sunrise. "If you're waiting for your mama to save you," he shouted, pacing in front of us, "you're gonna have a long morning." A few people laughed. Nobody laughed again after the push-ups started. By the end of the first week, I couldn't feel my shoulders. By the second, my feet were covered in blisters. By the third, I was beginning to understand something. The Army wasn't trying to break us. It was trying to strip away every excuse we carried with us. That was harder than I expected. One afternoon, halfway through a 12-mile ruck march, I felt a sharp pain shoot through my left foot. I tried to ignore it. Then another step. Another. Finally, my leg gave out. I hit the dirt. A medic checked me over before sending me for x-rays. Stress fracture. The words hit me almost as hard as the fall. Instead of graduating with my company, I'd be recycled into another training class after I healed. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling. Maybe Dad had been right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. The next afternoon during phone privileges, I called home. The phone rang 6 times, no answer. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What was I supposed to say? "Hi Dad, you were right, I'm injured." No, I wasn't giving him that satisfaction. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked outside. One of my drill sergeants happened to be standing near the barracks. He looked at me for a long moment. "Everything okay, Mitchell?" "Yes, drill sergeant." He wasn't convinced. "You called home?" "Yes." "They answer." "No." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes the people you expect to carry you don't." I waited. He wasn't finished. "So you learn to carry yourself." That conversation lasted maybe 20 seconds. I've remembered it for 15 years. After 6 weeks of rehab, I joined a new company. Starting over wasn't easy. Everyone else already knew each other's names, their inside jokes, their strengths. I was the new girl all over again. But something had changed inside me. I stopped worrying about proving my father wrong. I focused on proving myself right. When graduation day finally came, I stood at attention wearing the uniform I'd dreamed about since high school. No family came. No balloons. No hugs. Most soldiers spent the afternoon introducing parents to new friends. I spent mine eating barbecue with 3 recruits whose flights home had been canceled. Funny how strangers can become family faster than relatives sometimes. After basic training came air assault school at Fort Campbell. I still remember seeing those Black Hawk helicopters lifting into the Kentucky sky before sunrise. Their rotors shook the windows. The instructors smiled like men who enjoyed making life difficult. One of them looked at us on the first morning. "Half of you won't be standing here by graduation." He wasn't exaggerating. The obstacle course humbled everyone. The 12-mile road march humbled whoever was left. But I finished. Barely. The air assault badge felt surprisingly small in my hand, considering how much pain it represented. Over the next several years, life settled into a rhythm only military families really understand. PCS orders, packing boxes, learning new towns, making friends, saying goodbye, doing it all over again. I attended officer candidate school, earned my commission. Later, the Army sent me to graduate school. I never forgot that my father had once said joining the military meant throwing my future away. Instead, the Army kept opening doors I'd never imagined. My first deployment was to Afghanistan. Movies never show the boring parts. Hours of paperwork, equipment inspections, waiting, dust finding its way into everything, coffee that somehow tasted burned no matter who made it. But they also don't show how quickly strangers become people you'd trust with your life. Captain Maria Lopez from Texas, Chief Warrant Officer Ben Carter from Tennessee. Sergeant First Class Eddie Brooks from Alabama. Different backgrounds, different politics, different religions. None of it mattered. We depended on each other. That's enough. Back home, life went on without me. Every Christmas, I mailed a card to my parents. Nothing dramatic. Just, Merry Christmas. I hope you're both healthy. Love, Sarah. Every January, the envelope came back. Return to sender. The first time it crushed me. By the 7th year, it simply made me sad. One spring, while stationed back at Fort Campbell, tornadoes tore through western Kentucky. Our aviation unit was sent to assist with search and rescue operations. For 3 straight days, we flew supplies, evacuated injured residents, and searched neighborhoods that barely looked recognizable anymore. On the 4th day, local television crews arrived. That's when something ridiculous happened. A farmer's enormous white goat escaped after part of its fence collapsed. Nobody could catch it. Not the sheriff. Not animal control. Not 3 firefighters. The goat somehow decided it liked me. Or maybe it just liked the crackers in my cargo pocket. Either way, television cameras caught me jogging down the middle of a muddy road with a goat happily chasing me while 20 soldiers laughed so hard they could barely stand. The clip somehow made it onto Armed Forces Network. For months afterward, pilots greeted me by bleating like goats whenever I walked into a briefing room. Even our brigade commander couldn't keep a straight face. "You've got impressive leadership skills, Colonel." "I wasn't a colonel yet, sir." "No," he laughed. "But apparently livestock already respected your authority." Moments like that mattered. They reminded us we were still human. Even after long deployments, even after loss, years passed. Promotions came. Assignments changed. Responsibilities grew heavier. Some nights I still wondered what my father would think if he could see me. Then I'd remember. He had chosen not to. One evening after finishing paperwork long after sunset, I walked across the quiet flight line. Blackhawks rested under floodlights. Mechanics were finishing inspections. Somewhere nearby, someone played old country music from a maintenance bay. I stopped for a moment and realized something I hadn't expected. I no longer wished I could go back home. What I missed wasn't the house in Ohio. It wasn't the town. It wasn't even Sunday dinners. I missed the father I used to believe I had. And somehow, those weren't the same thing anymore. By the time I had 15 years in uniform, I'd stopped expecting life to surprise me. The Army has a way of curing that. You learn to expect the unexpected. Flights get canceled. Commanders retire early. Plans change overnight, but nothing prepared me for seeing my father become the hometown hero of a story he had never lived. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my office at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, finishing a stack of evaluation reports before heading to a brigade planning meeting. My executive officer, Major Allison Reed, knocked once before stepping inside. "Morning, ma'am." "Morning." She held up her phone. "You've been busy." "I've been sitting here for 2 hours." She smiled. "Not that kind of busy." She walked around my desk and turned the screen toward me. The headline from the Lancaster Eagle-Gazette filled the display. "Local woman to become Army colonel." I laughed. My hometown finally figured out I exist. I kept reading. She scrolled. Halfway through the article was a large photograph. Not of me, of my father. I stared at it. He was standing in front of Mitchell Auto Repair wearing his usual blue work shirt, arms folded across his chest. The caption read, "Frank Mitchell says he's proud his daughter chose a life of service." My stomach tightened. Allison quietly pulled a chair over and sat down. "You okay?" I didn't answer. Instead, I kept reading. According to the article, my father had encouraged me to enlist after high school. He supposedly believed military service would teach me discipline and leadership. The reporter quoted him saying, "Sarah always had the heart of a soldier. I just helped point her in the right direction." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. If someone had written it as fiction, nobody would have believed it. Allison finally spoke. "Is any of that true?" I looked up. "Not one sentence." She nodded. I figured. She'd known me for almost 8 years. Long enough to know I didn't talk much about my family. Long enough to know there was a reason. She leaned back. "So, what are you going to do?" "I have no idea." For the first time in years, I felt 18 again. Angry. Powerless. Confused. I closed the article. "I've got a meeting." "You also have a father rewriting history." "I know." "Are you going to correct him?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No." "Why?" "Because arguing with people like him never changes anything." Allison studied my face. Maybe. She stood. But sometimes silence helps the wrong person win. Her words stayed with me all day. That evening I called Grandpa's old number out of habit. The number had been disconnected for years. He'd passed away while I was deployed overseas. I still hadn't deleted it. Funny the things we hold on to. The following weekend, my promotion announcement spread farther than I expected. The Columbus television stations picked it up. Veterans groups shared the story online. Even the local VFW in Lancaster announced they planned to celebrate one of their hometown soldiers. Within days, my father was everywhere. He gave interviews outside his repair shop. He spoke at the Rotary Club. He even attended a Memorial Day breakfast where people applauded him for raising such an outstanding American. An old classmate texted me, "Your dad looks so proud on Channel 10. I stared at the message for a long time before putting the phone away. People weren't lying. They simply believed what they'd been told. A week later, I flew to Washington for meetings at the Pentagon. While waiting outside a conference room, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. Not a phone call. An email. The first I'd received from her in over a decade. Subject line, "I'm sorry." I opened it slowly. There were only 3 sentences. "Sarah, there are things you deserve to know. Watch your mail." No explanation. No signature. Just those words. 3 days later, back at Fort Liberty, the overnight delivery arrived. A plain brown envelope. No return address. Inside was another envelope. Yellowed with age. My name written across the front in my father's handwriting. I knew it immediately. I'd stared at those letters often enough growing up. My hand suddenly felt cold. I carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The date read, August 18, 2010, 2 weeks after I'd left home. The letter was short. Painfully short. "Sarah, don't waste your time writing or calling. You made your choice. From this day forward, I no longer have a daughter. Don't ever come home. Frank Mitchell." I read it once, then again, then a third time. The words hadn't become less painful with age. If anything, they carried even more weight. Because now I understood exactly what they'd cost both of us. At the bottom of the package was one more folded piece of paper. Different handwriting. My mother's. Just one sentence. "I've kept this hidden for 15 years. Your father is building a reputation on a lie. The truth belongs to you now." I sat alone in my office until after dark. The cleaning crew came and went. Someone turned off lights in the hallway. Still, I couldn't move. Part of me wanted to tear the letter into pieces. Another part wanted to send copies to every newspaper in Ohio. Neither felt right. The next morning I drove onto the installation earlier than usual. The sunrise painted the sky orange over the flight line. As I walked toward headquarters, I spotted Major Reed carrying 2 coffees. She handed me one. "You look terrible." I didn't sleep. She noticed the envelope under my arm. "Everything okay?" I handed her the letter. She read it quietly. When she finished, she folded it exactly the way she'd found it, and gave it back without saying a word. Finally, she asked, "What are you going to do now?" "I honestly don't know." "You could expose him." "I could." "You could also ignore him." "I could." She looked toward the parade field where soldiers were already gathering for morning physical training. Then she said something I never forgot. "Sometimes revenge is loud," she paused. "And sometimes it's simply refusing to protect someone from the truth." I carried that sentence with me all week. By Friday, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to attack my father. I wasn't going to embarrass him. I wasn't going to make a speech. If someone asked me the truth, I'd tell it. And if they wanted proof, I'd let my father's own words speak for themselves. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was only afraid of staying silent. Promotion ceremonies aren't usually emotional. They're precise, organized, predictable. Soldiers line up exactly where they're supposed to. The band plays. The color guard presents the colors. Someone reads the promotion orders. Family members pin on the new rank. People applaud, take photographs, and head to the reception afterward. I'd attended dozens over the years. I knew the routine by heart. What happened that morning wasn't routine. It was the only ceremony I've ever seen where the truth changed the atmosphere before a single speech was finished. I arrived at the auditorium at Fort Liberty just after 8 o'clock. The July sun was already warming the sidewalks, and volunteers from the Family Readiness Group were arranging coffee pastries and bottled water on long tables outside. Inside, soldiers in dress blues greeted guests as they found their seats. The army band quietly rehearsed in one corner. Everything looked exactly as it should. Major Allison Reed caught up with me near the backstage entrance. "You ready?" I smiled. "I've been ready for 15 years. She straightened my collar. "Colonel looks good on you. Don't jinx it." She laughed. "I'll see you out there." As she walked away, I took one slow breath and reached into my pocket. Grandpa William's challenge coin. 15 years. I'd carried it through basic training. Afghanistan. Promotion boards. Command changes. Every deployment. Its edges had become smooth from years in my hand. I rubbed my thumb across it once before putting it back. A young sergeant approached. "Ma'am." "Yes." "They're seating your guests." I nodded. "I'll stay back here." Truthfully, I didn't want to see my father before the ceremony. Not yet. About 20 minutes later, I peeked through the curtain. The auditorium was nearly full. Rows of soldiers. Military families, retired veterans, local civic leaders, a few members of Congress, several television cameras. Near the front sat my father. Frank Mitchell looked happier than I'd seen him in years. He shook hands with almost everyone who stopped by. A retired colonel congratulated him. Someone asked for a picture. He smiled easily, comfortably, as though he'd earned every bit of attention. My mother sat beside him. She looked different, smaller somehow. She glanced around the room but never smiled. For just a moment, our eyes met across the auditorium. She gave the slightest nod. Nothing more. But it told me everything. She knew. She knew I'd received the letter. She knew I understood. The ceremony began exactly at 9. The narrator welcomed everyone. The national anthem played. The audience stood. The invocation was brief. Then the master of ceremonies announced there had been an unexpected change. Our scheduled presiding officer was called to Washington late yesterday evening. A quiet murmur spread across the room. He smiled. "We are honored instead to welcome General David Harrington, Commanding General, United States Army Forces Command." Every soldier in the room straightened instinctively. A 4-star general. Even after 15 years in uniform, seeing 4 stars walk into a room changes the air. General Harrington entered without fanfare. Tall, gray-haired, calm. The kind of leader who didn't need to raise his voice. He shook hands with a few dignitaries before taking his seat. Then the promotion orders were read. My military career flashed across the screen behind me. Basic combat training. Officer Candidate School. Afghanistan. Eastern Europe. Disaster relief operations. Brigade Command. The narrator finished. "Please welcome Colonel Select Sarah Mitchell." I stepped onto the stage. Every sound disappeared. Only the click of my shoes against the wooden floor. I stopped exactly where rehearsed. Came to attention. The promotion orders concluded. Then something happened that wasn't on the program. General Harrington didn't wait for the traditional pinning ceremony. Instead, he walked directly toward me. He stopped less than 3 feet away, looked me straight in the eyes, raised a perfect salute. His voice carried effortlessly across the silent auditorium. "Welcome home, Colonel Sarah Mitchell." For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room exploded. Hundreds of people stood. Applause echoed off the walls. Some soldiers cheered. Others simply kept clapping. I returned the salute. "Thank you, sir." He lowered his hand but didn't step away. Instead, he turned toward the audience. "I've promoted many officers." He paused. "But every now and then we recognize someone whose journey represents the very best of this army." The applause faded. The room became quiet again. He continued. "Colonel Mitchell has spent 15 years leading soldiers with integrity, humility, and courage." Another pause. "She has served in combat. She has brought Americans home during natural disasters. She has mentored young officers who now command units of their own." Then his voice softened. "What impresses me most," he looked toward the audience, "is that she accomplished all of this without something many of us take for granted." Silence. A family waiting to welcome her home. Nobody shifted in their seats. Nobody coughed. The room had become completely still. General Harrington continued carefully. "Some soldiers inherit strength. Others build it. Colonel Mitchell built hers. I didn't look toward my father. I couldn't. I was afraid if I did, 15 years of hurt might show on my face. Instead, I stared straight ahead. The general nodded once. "Today, the United States Army proudly welcomes one of its finest leaders home." Another standing ovation, longer this time. When I finally glanced toward the front row, my father wasn't smiling anymore. His expression had changed completely. He looked confused, then uncomfortable, then frightened, because he understood something before anyone else did. The general hadn't accused him of anything. He hadn't mentioned him by name. But every parent in that room had heard the same message. Someone had failed this young woman long before the army ever met her. After the ceremony ended, dozens of guests formed a line to offer congratulations. Retired veterans shook my hand. Young lieutenants asked for photographs. Gold Star families hugged me. One elderly woman held both my hands. My husband served in Vietnam. She smiled through tears. He would have been proud of you. Thank you. She squeezed my hand. No, she shook her head gently. Thank you. I spotted my father standing about 20 feet away. He kept trying to work his way toward me. But every time he took a step, another soldier stopped to congratulate me. Another veteran wanted to talk. Another family asked for a picture. For 15 years, I'd chased after his approval. Now, without saying a single word, he couldn't even get close enough to speak to me. I didn't know it then, but the hardest part of the day was still waiting outside those auditorium doors. The reception was held in a large hall just across the parade field. Compared to the ceremony, it felt almost ordinary. Round tables were covered with white cloths. Coffee urns lined one wall beside trays of cookies and finger sandwiches. Soldiers relaxed enough to loosen their collars. Families posed for photographs beneath army banners. Somewhere in the corner, a pianist played quiet patriotic standards that blended into the conversations. For the first time all morning, I could breathe. I slipped away to a hallway outside the reception room and leaned against the wall. My hands were shaking. Not because I'd just become a colonel, because I'd spent the last hour pretending 15 years of memories didn't exist. Major Allison Reed found me a minute later. You okay? I think so. You don't sound convinced. I laughed quietly. I'm trying to remember how to breathe. She handed me a bottle of water. You handled yourself well. I didn't do anything. Exactly. She smiled. Sometimes that's the hardest thing. Before I could answer, a young public affairs officer stepped into the hallway. Ma'am, yes. The media would like a few minutes if you're available. I nodded. Let's get it over with. The interview area had been set up near the entrance. Several television stations were waiting. A reporter from WRL introduced herself. Colonel Mitchell, congratulations. Thank you. She asked about my career, leadership, young officers, military families. The questions were exactly what I expected. Then another reporter from Columbus raised his hand. I understand your father is here today? Yes. He gave an interview last week saying he always encouraged your military career. I felt every camera turn toward me. There it was, the moment I'd thought about for days. I could have answered a dozen different ways. I could have called him a liar. I could have walked away. Instead, I simply said, I think that question is better answered by something my father wrote. The room became quiet. I reached into the inside pocket of my dress blue jacket. Slowly, carefully, I removed the old envelope. Its edges were worn. The paper had yellowed with age. I held it for a moment before handing it to the reporter. I received this shortly after I enlisted. He looked surprised. Are you sure you want me to read it? I wouldn't have brought it otherwise. He opened the envelope carefully, almost respectfully. As his eyes moved across the page, the color drained from his face. He looked up. Colonel, I nodded once. It's all right. He cleared his throat, then read aloud. Sarah, don't waste your time writing or calling. You made your choice. From this day forward, I no longer have a daughter. Don't ever come home. Nobody moved. The only sound came from a coffee cup being set quietly onto a table somewhere behind the cameras. One of the reporters lowered his microphone. Another slowly looked toward my father. Frank Mitchell had stopped walking. He stood frozen only 20 feet away. His face had gone completely pale. For several seconds, nobody asked another question. Finally, the reporter looked at him. Mr. Mitchell. His voice remained polite. Did you write this letter? My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He swallowed. Looked at me. Then back at the reporter. Another long silence. Yes? The single word barely reached us. The reporter didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse him of anything. He simply asked another question. Then why did you tell the newspaper you supported your daughter's decision to serve? My father rubbed both hands together. I was angry. Someone behind me whispered. 15 years. He heard it. Everyone did. My father tried again. I didn't mean... The reporter interrupted gently. Sir, this wasn't written last week. He held up the letter. This was written 15 years ago. Another silence. No one rescued him. Not the reporters. Not the guests. Not even my mother. She stood quietly beside a table, tears rolling down her face. She never once tried to defend him. A retired sergeant major stepped forward. He had introduced himself to me earlier. His jacket was covered with ribbons earned over 30 years of service. He removed his veteran's cap, looked at me, then at my father. Finally he spoke, not loudly, just clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. I buried 2 sons who wore this uniform. His voice shook slightly. They both came home under a flag. He turned toward Frank. You had the chance to welcome your daughter home. He paused. You chose pride instead. No one applauded. No one cheered. The truth didn't need applause. It was heavy enough all by itself. A photographer quietly lowered her camera. She wasn't interested in pictures anymore. The story had already been told. My father looked around the room as if searching for someone to agree with him. No one did. Church friends who had driven from Lancaster avoided his eyes. Veterans stepped aside. Even the local reporter who'd interviewed him the week before quietly closed his notebook. The attention my father had enjoyed all morning disappeared in less than 2 minutes. Not because anyone humiliated him. Because nobody believed the version of himself he'd been selling anymore. He finally looked at me. I'm sorry. The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him. I believed he meant them. But I also knew they had arrived 15 years too late. I walked toward him. The room watched. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Tired. For a moment I saw not the man who had thrown me out. Just a father who had spent years defending a mistake until the truth became impossible to outrun. I appreciate that, I said quietly. His eyes filled with tears. I was wrong. Yes, I don't expect you to forgive me. I thought about Grandpa William, about every unopened Christmas card, about the nights overseas when I wished someone back home would answer the phone. Then I answered honestly, this day isn't about settling old scores. He nodded slowly. I know. It's about honoring the people who stood beside me when I had no family left. I glanced toward the soldiers gathered behind me. Allison, Ben, Maria, dozens of friends from 15 years in uniform. My family is standing right there. No anger, no triumph, just the truth. My father lowered his head. For the first time since I'd known him, he had nothing left to say. As he quietly walked toward the exit, no reporters followed. No cameras chased him. The crowd simply let him go. And somehow, that silence said more than any revenge speech ever could. 3 months passed before I heard from my father again. By then, life had settled into a familiar rhythm. My office doors seemed to revolve from sunrise until well after dark. Battalion commanders stopped by with training plans. Young captains asked for career advice. Helicopters lifted off before dawn and landed long after sunset. Somewhere in between, I signed paperwork, answered emails, and tried to remember to eat lunch. The promotion ceremony had faded from the headlines. The reporters had moved on. So had everyone else. At least that's what I thought. One Friday afternoon, my administrative assistant knocked on my door. Ma'am, this came in the regular mail. She handed me a plain white envelope. No return address. Just my name. The handwriting stopped me cold. Frank Mitchell. I waited until the office was empty before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. No legal language. No excuses. No attempt to defend himself. Just words that looked as though they had been rewritten several times before he finally mailed them. Sana Sarah, I spent 15 years telling myself I did the right thing. The day that letter was read out loud, I realized I'd been lying to everyone, especially myself. I wasn't protecting my family. I was protecting my pride. You didn't embarrass me. I embarrassed myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But if you ever decide to talk, I'll be waiting. Dad. It was the first time he'd signed anything Dad since I was 18. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my desk drawer beside Grandpa William's challenge coin. Neither one solved anything, but together they reminded me that people can leave us 2 very different kinds of inheritance. One teaches us who we should become. The other teaches us who we never want to be. A week later, I drove to Arlington National Cemetery. Whenever work brought me to Washington, I tried to stop there if time allowed. The place has a way of making every personal victory feel smaller, and every personal grievance feel quieter. White headstones stretched across the hills in perfect rows. Families walked slowly between them, carrying flowers. Some talked. Most didn't. I stopped in front of the grave of Captain Ben Carter. We'd deployed together years earlier. He never made it home. I placed a small American flag beside the stone. You would have made fun of me for becoming a colonel, I said quietly. I could almost hear his laugh. Only because you'd have to buy the coffee now. I smiled despite myself. Standing there, I realized something I hadn't admitted before. For years I'd imagined success as the moment my father finally regretted what he'd done. But standing among people who had given everything, that no longer seemed important. The promotion, the medals, the applause, even the letter. None of it mattered as much as the life I'd built along the way. The Army hadn't simply given me a career. It had given me purpose. It had given me people who never once asked whether I deserved to belong. They simply made room. When I returned to North Carolina, Major Allison Reed found me finishing paperwork. You've been quiet. I've been thinking. She leaned against my office door. Dangerous hobby. I laughed. I got a letter from my father. Her smile disappeared. What did he say? He apologized. She waited. So I don't know what to do. She thought for a moment, then shrugged. You know what I like about you? I've never asked. You don't make decisions when you're angry. I've made plenty. No, she smiled. You've made mistakes. There's a difference. I laughed again. She was right. I keep wondering if meeting him means I'm saying what he did was okay. It doesn't. I keep wondering if refusing means I'll carry this forever. She nodded slowly. That's the real question. 2 weeks later, I called the number written at the bottom of his letter. He answered on the second ring. Hello, it's Sarah. Silence, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard him take a shaky breath. I wasn't sure you'd ever call. I wasn't either. We agreed to meet the following Saturday. A Bob Evans restaurant just outside Columbus. Neutral ground. No memories, no audience. He was already there when I arrived. For a moment I almost didn't recognize him. Age had done what pride never could. His shoulders were lower. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. He stood when he saw me. You look... He stopped. I smiled a little. Older. He actually laughed. So do you. It was awkward. Painfully awkward. We ordered breakfast. Neither of us touched the food for several minutes. Finally he spoke. I watched every deployment I could find on the news. I looked up. You did? He nodded. I never told anyone. Why not? His eyes dropped to the table. Because every time I wanted to call, he swallowed. I remembered the letter. Neither of us said anything. After a while, he looked at me again. I thought if I admitted I was wrong, I'd have to admit I threw away 15 years. You did. He closed his eyes. I know. For the first time in my life. I wasn't angry. I was sad. Sad for the years we'd never get back. Sad for my mother who had spent those years standing silently between us. Sad for the grandchildren he might never know because of choices he'd made before they even existed. When breakfast was over, he reached into his wallet. I know I can't fix this. No. I know forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. No. He nodded. I just needed you to know... His voice cracked. I've been proud of you for a long time. I looked at him carefully, then answered with the truth. I believe you. He blinked. You do. I think you just didn't know how to admit it. Tears rolled down his face. Mine stayed where they were. Not because I wasn't emotional. Because I'd already cried those tears years earlier. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. Can I hug you? For just a second, I saw the father I remembered before everything fell apart. I stepped forward. The hug was brief. Awkward. Human. Not a miracle. Not the ending of a movie. Just two people acknowledging that some broken things can be repaired, even if the cracks never disappear. As I walked back to my truck, Grandpa's challenge coin rested in my pocket. I rubbed its smooth edge one last time. He'd been right all those years ago. Honor is lonely before it's respected. But eventually, if you keep walking, it brings you home. I used to think revenge meant watching someone else fall. Now I know better. The greatest revenge was building a life so full of purpose that one person's rejection could no longer define me. My father didn't give me my strength, losing him did. And in a strange way that became the greatest gift hidden inside the deepest wound I'd ever carried. If my story reminded you that your worth is never determined by someone else's approval, I hope you'll carry that thought with you today. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and doing what's right, I hope you know you're not walking that road alone. Thank you for spending this time with me.